Chapter 12. Dame school ended in mid-August, and 100 new tasks waited to fill the hours. The onions must be harvested, packed into the rough sacks that Mercy had sewn, and stacked ready to be hauled into Hartford or bartered for goods when a sailing ship came up the river. Early apples waited to be peeled and sliced and dried in the sun for the winter's use. There was cider to be made from the wild pears. The first corn stood high in the meadow, row after endless row waiting to be plucked. Often Kit and Judith and even Rachel worked side by side with Matthew in the fields until sunset, and there was not a moment to spare. It was hard now to find the time for stolen visits with Prudence and Hannah. Occasionally, by chance, Kit would find herself alone and rushing through her task at double speed. She would steal down the path to Blackbird Pond, hoping that Prudence too had been able to escape. One sunny day, a whole empty afternoon stretched unexpectedly before her. She had been helping Judith and Rachel to make the winter supply of candles. It was hot, sticky work. For 2 days they had been boiling the small gray bayberries that Kit and Judith had gathered in the fields, and Rachel had skimmed off the thick greenish tallow. It simmered now in the huge iron kettle, beneath which the fire must be kept glowing all through the long hot day. At the opposite end of the kitchen, at a good distance from the heat of the fire, the candle rods hung suspended between chair backs. Back and forth the three women walked, carrying the candle rods, dipping the dangling wicks into the tallow, hanging them back up to cool, and dipping them again till the wax flattened slowly into the hard, slow-burning candles that would fill the house with fragrance all through the coming months. Finally, Rachel wiped the damp gray strands back from her forehead and surveyed the rows of sleek green candles. That's plenty for today, more than I counted on. The rods won't be free to use again until tomorrow. I have to look in on Sally Fry's new baby that's ailing, and you girls deserve a rest. You've been working since sunup. Kit left the work gratefully. She had no intention of resting, however. Presently she was tripping out the door when her aunt called her back. "Where are you going, Kit?" Kit looked down, not answering. Her aunt studied her. "Wait," she said then. She went into the kitchen and came back after a moment with a small package, which she had held out for Kit to shamefacedly. It was a bit of leftover apple tart. So Aunt Rachel had known all the time. Kit suddenly threw her arms around her aunt. "Oh, Aunt Rachel, you are so good." "I can't help it, Kit," her aunt said weirdly. "I don't approve at all, but I can't bear to think of anyone going hungry when we have such plenty." This time, as Kit drew near Blackbird Pond, she was startled by the sharp ring of an axe. She had hoped to find Prudence there. Instead, as she came round the corner of the thatched cottage, she discovered Nate Eaton, his wide tanned body bared to the waist, his axe sprouting a fountain of chips as he swung at a rotting log. "Oh," she exclaimed in confusion. "I didn't know the Dolphin was in again." "She's not. We're becalmed, O rocky hill, and I rode ahead. Would you have stayed away?" Kit was in a mood to overlook his mockery. "Barbados molasses and firewood," she commented instead. "I'm beginning to understand how Hannah can shift for herself out here. What a pile of wood! Nate on a hot day." "Come time to use it, I'll be bound for Barbados," replied Nate briskly. "Helps keep my hand in." Hannah peered from the doorway. "More company," she rejoiced. "Come inside where it's shady. Nate B. has piled up more wood than an old woman could burn in a year." Nate set down his axe. "Today is strictly business," he announced. "The next job is some new thatch for Chat Roof. Some spots there's not enough to make a decent mouse's nest." "Can I help?" Kit was astonished to hear her own voice. Nate's eyebrows lifted. His quizzical blue eyes dwelt on her brown arms so deliberately that she closed her fists to hide the calluses on her palms. Maybe you could at that, he replied, with an air of bestowing a great favor. You can gather up the grass while I cut. Kit followed him into the swamp and stooped together great armfuls of the long grasses that fell behind his scythe. The strong, sweet smell of it tickled her nostrils. When he propped two logs against the cottage wall to make a crude ladder, she amused him by climbing nimbly up after him. Together, they spread the bunches of thatch, and Kit held them flat in place while he fastened them with stout vines, his brown fingers moving with the strength and sureness of long years in the rigging. When the last tuft was in place, they sat on the fragrant, springy cushion and rested, looking out over the sunny meadow toward the gleaming band of river. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Nate sat munching on a straw. Kit leaned her bare elbows back on the prickly thatch. The sun pressed against her with an almost tangible weight. All about them was a lazy, humming, proper goodbye. Thinking about a bird. Now having of bees broken by the sharp clatter of a locust. The queer rasping call of the blackbird rose from the grass, and now and then they caught the hash of scarlet on the glossy black wings. This is the way I used to feel in Barbados, Kit thought with surprise. Light as air somehow. Here I've been working like a slave, much harder than I've ever worked in the onion fields, but I feel as though nothing mattered except just to be alive right at this moment. The river is so blue today, she said sleepily. It could almost be the water in Carlisle Bay. Homesick? Asked Nate casually, his eyes on the blue strip of water. Not here, she answered. Not when I'm in the meadow or with Hannah. He turned to look at her. How has it been, Kit? He asked seriously. I mean, really, are you sorry you came? She hesitated. Sometimes I am. They've been good to me, but it's very different here. I don't seem to fit in, Nate. You know, he said, looking carefully away at the river, once, when I was a kid, we went ashore at Jamaica, and in the marketplace there was a man with some birds for sale. They were sort of yellow-green with bright scarlet patches. I was bent on taking one home to my grandmother in Saybrook, but father explained it wasn't meant to live up here, that the birds here would scold and peck at it. Funny thing, that morning when we left you here in Wethersfeld, all the way back to the ship, all I could think of was that bird. Kit stared at him. That cocky young seaman striding back through the woods without even a proper goodbye, thinking about a bird? Now, having spoken too seriously, he turned back her solemn regard with a laugh. Who would guess, he teased, that I'd ever see you perched on a rooftop with straw in your hair? Kit giggled. Are you saying I've turned into a crow? Not exactly. His eyes were intense, blue with merriment. I can still see the green feathers if I look hard enough, but they've done their best to make you into a sparrow, haven't they? It's these Puritans, Kit sighed. I'll never understand them. Why do they want a life to be so solemn? I believe they actually enjoy it more that way. Nate stretched flat on his back on the thatch. If you ask me, it's all that schooling. It takes the fun out of life, being cooped up like that day after day, and the Latin they cram down your throat. Do you realize, Kit, there are 25 different kinds of nouns alone in the accidents? I couldn't stomach it. Mind you, he went on, it's not that I don't favor an education. A boy has to learn his numbers, but the only proper use for them is to find your latitude with a cross staff. Books, now that's different. There's nothing like a book to keep you company on a long voyage. What sort of books? Kit asked in some surprise. Oh, most any sort. We pick them up in odd places. I like the old logboats best, and accounts of voyages. But once a man left us some plays from England that were good reading. There was one about a shipwreck on an island in the Indies. Kit bounced off the grass in excitement. You mean The Tempest? I can't remember. Have you read that one? It was our favorite. Kit hugged her knees in delight. Grandfather was sure Shakespeare must have visited Barbados. I suspect he liked to think of himself as Prospero. And you were the daughter, I suppose. What was her name? Miranda. But I wasn't much like her. Nate laughed. That Shakespeare should have gone on with the story. He didn't tell what happened when the young prince took her back with him to England. I bet she gave the ladies plenty to talk about. It wasn't England, it was Naples. And that's another thing, Nate, she remembered. All this talk against England and the king, I don't understand it. No, I suppose you couldn't, not being brought up here. Why are they so disloyal to King James? There are two sides to loyalty, Kit, said Nate, looking suddenly almost as serious as John Holbrook or William. If the king respects our rights and keeps his word to us, then he will retain our loyalty. But if he revokes the laws he has made and tax and come about till the ship is on her beam ends, then finally we will be forced to cut the hawser. But that is treason. What is treason, Kit? A man is loyal to the place he loves. For me, the Dolphin there is my country. My father would give his life for the right to sail her when and where he pleases, and so would I. Anyway, 'twould do little good with a gale blowing to wait for orders from His Majesty in England. I suppose it's like that for these people in Wethersfield. How can a king on a throne in England know what is best for them? A man's first loyalty is to the soil he stands on. That would please Uncle Matthew anyway, Kit thought, bewildered and a little dismayed to glimpse under Nate's nonchalant surface a harsh of the same passion that made life in the woodhouse so uncomfortable. Nate was a New Englander too. Had she forgotten? She was almost relieved to hear Hannah's voice at the foot of the ladder. Has thee finished thatching yet? 'Tis high time thee had a bite of supper. Supper? Kit had not even noticed the slanting sun. Is it as late as that? Nate's hand on her wrist detained her as she scrambled toward the ladder. You will come often to see her, won't you? He reminded her. Of course, Kit hesitated. I worry about her sometimes, she whispered. She seems so smart and spry, and then the next moment she seems to forget. She talks as though her husband were still alive. Oh, that? Nate dismissed her fears with a single word. Hannah's in good trim right enough, but her mind wanders now and then. Don't let it bother you. I have an idea. Hannah is a lot older than we think, and she's lived through a lot. She and her husband starved in jail for months in Massachusetts. Finally, they were branded and tied to a cart's tail and bogged across the boundary. From what I hear, Thomas Tupper was sort of a hero. If he still seems close enough to Hannah so she can talk to him after all these years, you wouldn't take that away from her, would you? As usual, Hannah did not urge her to stay. My company always has to hurry off, she chuckled. Nate's always in a hurry, and thee, and now Prudence. Who is Prudence? Pulling on his blue cotton shirt, Nate fell into step beside her along the path to the south meadow. You remember the little girl with the doll? Hurrying along the path, Kit told him about the reading lessons. She expected that when they reached South Road, Nate would turn back, but to her consternation, he strode along beside her, and even when she hesitated at Broad Street, he did not take the hint. The happy mood of the afternoon was rapidly dissolving in apprehension. Why on earth had Nate persisted in coming too? There would be enough explanations without a strange seaman to account for. But Nate easily matched her nervous pace with his swinging stride, apparently quite unaware of her desire to be rid of him. There they all were, sitting outside near the doorstep. Then supper must be over. As they drew near, William rose heavily to his feet and stood waiting. Kit, where in the world have you been? Judith spoke up. William has been waiting for ever so long. Kit looked from one to the other, from her aunt's barely restrained tears to her uncle's waiting judgment. There is nothing I can possibly tell them, she thought, except the truth. I've been helping to thatch Hannah Tupper's roof, she said. I'm sorry that I didn't realize how late it was, Aunt Rachel. This is Nathaniel Eaton, Captain Eaton's son from the Dolphin. He was mending Hannah's roof, and I helped him. The family allowed Nate scanty nods of acknowledgement, but William did not alter a muscle of his tight-clenched jaw. The two young men measured each other for a long moment. Nate turned to Matthew Wood. I was at fault, sir, he said with a dignity Kit would never have given him credit for. I shouldn't have accepted her help, but it is a tricky job, and when she came along, I was greatly obliged to her. I trust that none of you have been inconvenienced. He looked back at William, one eyebrow tilted at the old familiar angle. Kit stood helpless as he took his sleeve and strode slightly away. He had done his best, but the reckoning was still to come. Why should you take it upon yourself to mend a roof for that Quaker woman? Demanded her uncle. She lives all alone, began Kit. She is a heretic, and she refuses to attend meeting. She has no claim on your charity. But someone ought to help her, Uncle Matthew. If she wants help, let her repent her sin. You are never to go to that place again, Catherine. I forbid it. Morosely, Kit followed the family into the house. Don't mind too much, Kit, Mercy whispered. Hannah will be all right if she has that seaman to help her. I liked his looks. Chapter 13. To think you've never been to a husking bee, exclaimed, claimed. I think this was to say exclaimed Judith. Why, they're more fun than all the holidays put together. Just husking corn all evening? It sounded to Kit like an odd sort of party. Her arms still ached from wrestling the heavy ears from the stalks, row after row, hour after hour. Oh, it doesn't seem like work when everyone does it together. We all sing, and Jeb Whitney brings his fiddle, and there's cakes and apples and cider. Oh, I always think autumn is the very best time of year. They say the crop is not too plentiful this year, Mercy put in slyly. Could be there won't be as many red ears as usual? Judith tossed her head. I'll find one, never you fear, she said blithely. I have my own methods. Red ears? Are they better than the others? At Kit's innocent question, her two cousins burst into pearls of merriment. You wait and see, advised Judith. Come to think of it, I guess I'll make certain that William gets one too. Then you'll find out. At her own sudden suspension, Kit blushed crimson. In a rare mood of intimacy, Judith linked arms with Kit as they set out along High Street to gather the last of the corn in the meadow. It was more than the sparkling September air that accounted for her high spirits. I just feel it in my bones, she confided, that something wonderful is going to happen tonight at the corn husking. Judith's excitement was contagious. Kit began to feel a tingle of anticipation, though she still couldn't see how anyone could make a festivity out of hard, dusty work. It was the first party of any sort to which she had been invited in Wethersfield. The few young people she had come to know, the ones she had seen at Sabbath meeting and lecture day, would all be there. I never knew you could predict the future, she laughed, but I hope you're right. I know I am, said Judith, because this time I'm going to see to it that something happens. I've made up my mind. You mean John Holbrook? Of course I mean John. You know how he is, Kit, so serious and shy. He'll never be able to find his tongue if I don't help him out. But John is still a student. I know. He hasn't any property like William or any way to support me yet. That's why he doesn't speak. But I know how John feels, and I know how I feel. And why should we wait forever without even making plans? And what could ever be a better time than a husking bee? Judith, Kit ventured doubtfully, do you really think? You'd better be thinking about your own affairs, laughed Judith. William isn't like John, he's like me, and when he's made up his mind, he isn't going to wait forever. Why did Judith have to remind her? Kit thought wryly. Ever since the day of William's house raising, when the neighbors had gathered together and working from dawn to sunset, had raised a fine imposing frame and nailed the sturdy new clapboards in place, Kit had known that William was only waiting a prosperous time to speak. She had long since decided what her answer would be. As William's wife, she could come and go as she pleased. There would be no more endless drudgery, and she could snap her fingers at a woman like Goodwife Gruff. Besides, William admired her. In spite of the fact that he was often bewildered and scandalized, he was still as infatuated as he had been the first Sabbath morning. Then why did Judith's teasing always rise this cold little lump of foreboding? She glanced longingly toward the little house by Blackbird Pond and promised herself that she would steal a few moments on the way home. But work as fast as she could, when she and Judith finished their task, there was time for only a flying visit. Prudence had been there, Hannah told her, but had not dared to wait for a lesson. If only these old eyes of mine could make out the letters, Hannah regretted. But actually, the child doesn't seem to need much help. She's just hungry for more to read, poor little mite. I keep hoping the goat's milk will put a little fat on her bones. Judith was out of sight when Kit started back along South Road, but to her surprise, she glimpsed a familiar wide black hat in the distance and paused to wait as John Holbrook came looping along the road to catch up with her. Dr. Bulkley sent me to find some skunk cabbage, he explained, waving a bunch of green. 'Tis a rare cure for asthma, he says. How do you come to be walking alone? Judith went on ahead, she explained. Had he hoped to meet Judith on the road? I stopped to see Hannah Tupper. She said the name deliberately and was rewarded by his startled eyes. The widow Tupper? Does your family know about it, Kit? Judith and Mercy know. Hannah is a good friend of mine. She is a Quaker. Does that matter? Yes, I think it does, he said thoughtfully. Not that I hold anything against the Quakers, but this woman has no proper reputation. She's been accused twice of practicing witchcraft. That is just cruel gossip. Probably, but I'd hate to see it turn against you, too. You know, Kit, there are a few people here in town who still haven't forgotten that day you jumped into the river. If they find out you're acquainted with a witch. John, how can you pay attention to anything so silly? Witchcraft isn't silly, Kit. Dr. Bulkley says, oh, Dr. Bulkley says, retorted Kit. I'm tired of hearing what Dr. Bulkley says. Don't you ever think for yourself anymore, John? At the hurt in his blue eyes, she was instantly contrite. I'm sorry, she said, impulsively laying a hand on his sleeve. I didn't mean that, really. But since you've been studying with him, that man, you seem to have changed somehow. At once he forgave her. You don't know him as I do, he exclaimed. Every day I realize how every day I realize more how much I have to learn. But it's not just the studies. We do change, Kit, in spite of ourselves. At least some of us do, he added with a flash of the humor she had missed in him lately. I don't want to preach at you, Kit. It's just that the Quakers have a name for stirring up trouble, and it seems to me you managed to get in enough trouble by yourself. I know, Kit agreed cheerfully, but it's Hannah who's helping me to change. If you only knew her. John walked beside her, listening earnestly as she tried to make him understand the lonely woman in the meadow. Presently, they reached the crossing at Broad Street, where John would turn toward Dividend, and they stood for a moment, both unwilling to end this rare moment of comradeship. John took off his hat, leaned his elbows on the fence post, and stood gazing reflectively back at the meadow, the wind stirring his fair hair. Ah, at once he turned and smiled at Kit with the same unexpected sweetness that had warmed her heart the first day in Saybrook Harbor. 5 months, he said, since we came here together on the Dolphin. Such high hopes we had, you and I. It has turned out well for you, hasn't it, Kit? A fine big house going up, and a good dependable fellow like William. I hope you will be very happy. Kit colored and looked down at the browning grass. She did not want to talk about William. And you, John? She asked instead. Perhaps, he answered, and the smile lingered at the corners of his mouth. We shall see. Sooner than you think, maybe, thought Kit. Are you going to the husking bee tonight? She inquired mischievously. I don't know, he considered. Will Mercy be there? Mercy? Why, no, I don't suppose she can be. It's more than a mile away. Then I think I shall spend the evening at your house instead. I seldom have a chance to talk to her. But they say a husking bee is such. Slowly, she began to realize what he had said. John, why should you want to talk to Mercy? His eyes twinkled. Why do you think I come so often? But I thought, we all thought, I, I mean, it has always been Mercy from the very beginning. Didn't you guess that? Oh, John! In a burst of incredulous joy, Kit flung both arms rapturously around his neck. With a startled glance up at the road, John tactfully freed himself. His very ears were pink, but his eyes were shining down at her. I'm glad you approve, he said. Do you think I have a chance, Kit? A chance? Just you try. Oh, John, I'm so happy I could dance a jig. I can't try yet, he reminded her soberly. I have nothing to offer her, nothing at all. You'll have a church of your own some day. Only could Mercy. Do you think she could manage a minister's household? There are so many things Mercy can't do, John. Then I will do him for her, he said quietly. I don't want a wife to wait on me. For Mercy, just to be what she is, I could never do enough to make up for it. Then tell her tonight, John, she urged, remembering the longing in Mercy's eyes. Perhaps, he answered again. We shall see. Walking home past Meeting House Square, Kit could hardly keep from dancing. She wanted to shout and sing, Mercy and John Holbrook, how right! How exactly unbelievably right! How could she keep from telling someone? They must see that she was bursting with excitement. Judith would surely. Judith! Her jubilant feet came suddenly to a halt. How could she have forgotten? Should she have said something to John, warned him somehow? No, she could hardly have done that, in fairness to Judith. He was so completely unaware, so serious and shy, as Judith herself had said, so wrapped in his books and his dreams of Mercy that he had never even noticed that Judith had set her cap for him. What was this something that Judith was so sure was going to happen tonight? What sort of scheme did Judith have up her sleeve? Well, if he doesn't go to the husking bee, nothing can happen, she thought practically. And who knows if he's there with Mercy? Oh dear, Judith is going to mind terribly. But she is so proud. She'll put her nose in the air and pretend she never had such an idea in her head, and she'll get over it. Because John isn't really suitable for Judith. If only he will speak tonight. Judith lingered exasperatingly in front of the little mirror that evening. She was wearing the new blue wool dress for the first time, with a snowy white collar and deep cuffs, and she had never looked lovelier. Her eyes were a deep blue in the candlelight, the clear white of her skin flushed with secret excitement. Kit fidgeted impatiently. It didn't matter how she looked. William was waiting already, and they must all get away quickly before John arrived. If only Aunt Rachel and Uncle Matthew could find something to do, and Mercy could be sitting alone in the firelight. They were too late, however. John Holbrook stepped inside the door just as the two girls rustled down the stairs, and his eyes were lively with admiration as he waited, with a courtly bow, to let them go ahead of him into the kitchen. Judith tipped back her head and smiled up at him provocatively. Rachel put aside her work, and even Matthew came to the door to see the young folks off. "I'm so glad you've come," Judith dimpled. "Now we can all walk together." "I'm not going to the husking," John told her, smiling. "I think I shall stay here and visit with Mercy instead." "But they're all expecting you. Mercy doesn't mind, do you, Mercy?" John shook his head, still smiling. There was the reflection of Judith's excitement in his own pale face. "I think I shall stay here," he insisted. "There is something I want to speak to your father about." His words had a breathtaking effect. Judith took a step backward, one hand at her throat, and a wave of scarlet spread from the white collar to her black curls. "Tonight?" she whispered in unbelief. Then suddenly joy came flooding past every doubt and restraint. "Oh, father," she cried impetuously, "he doesn't need to miss the husking, does he? You know what he wants to ask. Say yes now so we can go to the party together." Matthew Wood was bewildered. "Why, daughter," he rebuked her, "what sort of talk is this?" "Shameless talk, and I don't care," laughed Judith, tossing her back curls. "Oh, father, you must have guessed. John doesn't need to tell you." Such radiance was irresistible. Matthew Wood's stern features softened, and when he turned to John, he was actually smiling. "If you will come courting such a headstrong, brazen girl," he said indulgently, "then I can only give you both my blessing. Perhaps you can teach her some meekness." John stood dumbfounded, his pale face shocked, completely colorless. He seemed totally unable to collect his wits. "Tell them," urged Kit silently and desperately. "You've got to say something, John, right away." If he had heard her, John opened his white lips and made a hoarse sound. "Sir, I, he attempted. Then, still incredulous, he looked back at Judith. Every trace of pride and haughtiness was wiped from her face. Such utter happiness and trust shone from those blue eyes that John faltered, and in that moment of hesitation he was lost. William's heavy hand descended on his shoulder. Aunt Rachel held out both hands to him, with tears in her eyes. Then Mercy came slowly from the hearth, her head up, her great eyes clear and lustrous. "I am so glad for you both," she said warmly. Only Kit could say nothing. Perhaps I dreamed it, she thought, watching Mercy, but she knew she had not dreamed the love in Mercy's eyes that summer evening. Now no one but herself would ever know. She had counted on Judith's pride, but Mercy did not have Judith's pride. It was something much stronger than pride that upheld her. Presently, the four set out together into the still frosty twilight. Judith took John's arm confidingly, still carried quite beyond constraint on her own wave of happiness. "You'll never know," she chattered. "You saved me from being the most outrageous hussy, John. I had a scheme. I'm not sure I would have dared, actually, but now—" "Now what?" Kit asked, walking behind them. She ached with her own stifled protest. He can't do this, she told herself over and over, but she knew that he could. John understood Mercy. He knew that she had never in her life reached for her hand for so much of a crust of bread that Judith might want. If he should hurt Judith now, Kit knew, Mercy would never forgive either him or herself. Lost in her own thoughts, Kit barely noticed that William's dignified pace was even more deliberate than usual. They had dropped some distance behind the others when a purposeful hand grasped her own elbow. "Wait a moment, Kit," said William. "Let them go ahead. I want to talk to you." The quiet resolution in his voice penetrated her racing thoughts. Reluctantly, she gave him a corner of her attention. The intent look in his eyes, even in the waning light, warned her of what was coming. Oh no, not after all that happened. She was tempted to run for the shelter of the fireside in Mercy. "I didn't mean to speak tonight," William was saying, "but watching those two, don't you envy them their happiness, Kit?" "I can't bear it," she thought in a panic. "Not tonight." The last two words escaped into a half whisper. William took them literally. "Tomorrow, then. Let me speak to your uncle. You won't need to help me out," he added with an unwanted humor. "I am quite capable of speaking for myself." Kit stood shivering in the damp twilight. This silk dress is not warm enough for New England, she thought irrelevantly. Then she made an effort to gather her forces. William's question was not unexpected, after all. She had thought that her answer was all ready. "Please, William," she whispered, "don't speak to him yet." William looked down at her, perplexed. "Why not? Don't you want to marry me, Kit?" She hesitated. "I had not thought of getting married so soon." "Judith is just 16, he reminded her. "I know, but I'm still a stranger, William. There are so many things I have to learn." "That's true," he agreed. He was silent a moment. "I won't hurry you, Kit," he said reasonably. "The house can't be finished before spring anyway. I'll wait for your answer." What her answer would be, he seemed to have not the slightest doubt. As they walked on, his hand remained on her elbow with a new possessiveness. Laughter spilled from the open door. The great barn was glowing with lanterns swinging from the hand-hewn timbers. There was a fragrance of new hay and the warm, reassuring smell of cattle. The gaily dressed young people sat in a circle around a vast mound of silk-tasseled corn, and already the husking had begun. Shouts of welcome greeted the newcomers, and the circle shifted to make room for them. To Kit's surprise, the husking was fun, enlivened by singing and wagers and jokes that seemed uproariously funny. She was astonished. Weathersfield was not always a dull, solemn place. Had her uncle ever been to a husking, she wondered? All at once, a new shout went up. Judith sat with a half-shucked ear of corn in her lap, and from the ruffled silk peeped bright orange-red kernels. Judith laughed and tossed back her head with all of her old arrogance. "I haven't a need for anything like that," she said triumphantly. "What am I offered for it?" Without waiting for an answer, she tossed it straight across the circle into William's hands. There were a few quick giggles, a hush of curiosity. Kit sat helpless, her cheeks on one, and then the laughter and the cheering left her giddy as William stepped resolutely forward to claim his forfeit.